Hello, Blair.
Georgina? You don't sound like yourself.
That's funny, because I feel more like myself than ever.
Where are you?
Taking care of what you obviously couldn't.
I don't think Jesus would approve of that.
Well, you can tell Jesus that the bitch is back.
In July 2022, Michelle Trachtenberg, best known for her roles as Dawn Summers, Buffy's enigmatic younger sister on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Georgina Sparks, the scheming socialite on Gossip Girl, made a rare public appearance. She joined longtime friend and co-star Sarah Michelle Gellar for a quiet podcast conversation. It wasn't a headline-grabbing interview, nor did it aim to be. Instead, it was a gentle, candid reunion between two women who had once shared the screen in a world of supernatural drama and were now looking back with a kind of hard-earned clarity. Trachtenberg, who always hovered just outside the glare of Hollywood's most chaotic spotlight, used the moment to reflect, not with bombshell revelations, but with the kind of honesty rarely heard from celebrities. She spoke about growing up on screen and the often harder task of trying to grow up afterwards. At just 11 years old, Trachtenberg starred in Harriet the Spy, a rare children's film that dared to show childhood not just as wonder, but as confusion, observation, and emotional depth. With her watchful eyes and quiet intensity, she brought an authenticity that set her apart from typical child stars. She wasn't precocious in the Hollywood sense, not a miniature adult packed with sass, but something more nuanced. She played Harriet like a real kid, curious, overwhelmed, trying to make sense of it all. That subtlety became Trachtenberg's signature, expressing a world of emotion with the slightest twitch of her lips or a fleeting glance of her eyes. By the time she joined Buffy the Vampire Slayer in 2000, she was just 15. Her character, Dawn, arrived in Season 5 as Buffy's mysterious younger sister, a narrative twist that initially frustrated fans. But over time, many came to appreciate how perfectly Trachtenberg captured the awkwardness of adolescence. Later, she turned that vulnerability inside out, portraying the diabolical Georgina Sparks on Gossip Girl, one of TV's most memorable villains. While many of Trachtenberg's peers chased fame relentlessly, many of her Gossip Girl castmates notably so, she remained selective, disappearing from the public eye when it suited her and speaking up only when it mattered. Still, she never fully left Hollywood behind, and Hollywood in some ways never let go of her. Over the years, she occasionally alluded to the emotional toll of growing up in an industry that so often chews up and spits out young actors. Friends described her as fiercely loyal, intensely private, and quietly haunted by the ghosts of a fame that had come too early for her. In her mid-20s, at the peak of her Gossip Girl fame and her career seemingly poised for a new chapter, Trachtenberg began facing a series of health challenges. She was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that brought with it chronic fatigue, unrelenting pain, and bouts of deep depression. Though she never made dramatic public statements about her condition, her social media posts grew more cryptic, not cries for help exactly, but quiet acknowledgments of a private battle. In that final podcast with Sarah Michelle Gellar, there was a softness and sadness to her voice. Quote, "Sometimes I still feel like that girl with the notebook," she said, referring to her breakout role in Harriet the Spy, "just trying to figure people out, trying to figure me out." In the years that followed, her health declined further. She was diagnosed with diabetes, then fatty liver disease, a common complication in diabetic adults. And in 2024, she underwent a liver transplant. It was a major surgery, of course, but it unfortunately did little to reverse the progression of her illness. On February 20, 2025, Trachtenberg was seen out for dinner with friends at Sartiano's, a restaurant in New York City. Witnesses described her as frail, having difficulty walking down the restaurant's front steps. She returned home that evening, accompanied by a friend. 6 days later, on the morning of February 26th, her mother arrived at her apartment and found Michelle dead, having passed away in her sleep. Michelle Trachtenberg was 39 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Michelle Trachtenberg.
As news broke of Trachtenberg's death late on the morning of February 26th, there was an uncertainty as to what had happened. Almost no one outside of her immediate family and friends knew she was sick, and then, when her parents refused an autopsy based on their religious beliefs, speculation swirled. Stories began to surface that Trachtenberg had been suffering from mental illness, leading to erroneous reports that she may have taken her own life. However, later that day, TMZ broke the story based on law enforcement sources of her autoimmune disease and recent liver transplant, which served to quell some of the speculation. Finally, 7 weeks after her death, on April 16th, the New York Medical Examiner's Office disclosed that she had previously been diagnosed with diabetes, and it was this condition that had caused her death.
Derek, we were in the newsroom, right, when all of this was happening. We're not typically as confused for as long as we were about what exactly happened. Frankly, it wasn't until April 16th that we learned about it, and it was a shock. Nobody had mentioned diabetes before that.
Yeah, she was an intensely private person outside of her fame, but she was also a person who was very important to a lot of people in our office. Michelle Trachtenberg, if you're of a certain age, Harriet the Spy is a huge movie. It looms very large, and then she grew with those people to roles like Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She was one of those child stars who wasn't chewed up immediately and just in Harriet the Spy and then you never heard of her. She sort of grew up along with people, and there was an inherent relatability to Michelle Trachtenberg. She was beautiful in her own way, but she was also someone who could be a girl next door, a friend of yours. She had these big, open, sincere eyes, and I think people really felt like Michelle Trachtenberg was someone they could just be buddies with.
I was, I'm too old for her to have known her in her career, but through COVID, we watched Buffy and we watched Gossip Girl from beginning to end, and there was a real identifiability with her, I think, for people of all ages. And when she died, the sound in the newsroom was different. It was the loss of somebody that was so unexpected. We haven't thought about her in a while. She's been out of the mainstream for a long time. But there was a real sort of loss of a child friend, somebody we all knew sort of growing up with.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize there was real shock. She's 39 years old. Val Kilmer and Gene Hackman also passed away around this time, but that's a very old man, and that's someone who was battling cancer, and Val Kilmer for a very long time. Michelle Trachtenberg was just out of the spotlight. She would do these podcasts occasionally and talk about Buffy and so forth, but we didn't know she was suffering. And the outpouring of grief and support for Trachtenberg was immediate. Sarah Michelle Gellar posted a heartfelt tribute on Instagram saying, quote, "Michelle wasn't just a co-star. She was my little sister on screen and off. I still can't wrap my head around this. She was smart, fiercely funny, and had a kindness that made you feel safe. My heart is shattered." Joss Whedon, creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, wrote, quote, "Michelle was never the loudest person in the room, but she was always the one who could surprise you. An unshakable stillness followed by a zinger that floored everyone. She was one of the sharpest actors I've ever worked with, and I'll miss her forever." And actor and childhood star Frankie Muniz said, quote, "We grew up together in ways most people can't understand. There's a bond you form when you're kids in that industry, and Michelle always protected that bond. She was the real deal."
When you look at Michelle Trachtenberg's career, it's easy to think first of her breakout parts as a child actress performing in lighthearted roles. But behind the precocious energy and expressive eyes was an actress with deep range, remarkable discipline, and an uncanny ability to capture the audience's attention. The New York Times TV critic said she was, quote, "somehow able to consistently squeeze emotional depth and complexity out of even the simplest material." Indeed, Trachtenberg was never cast in serious dramatic roles, but she excelled in young adult entertainment, carving out a niche where her talents truly shone. Her ability to bring depth and authenticity to her characters set her apart, making her a standout performer in the genre. Born in New York City, she began acting in commercials at the age of 3. Trachtenberg's big break came with the Nickelodeon series The Adventures of Pete and Pete, where she played Nona Mecklenburg. The role hinted at what would become a signature for Trachtenberg, playing characters who were both wise and vulnerable, often standing just to the side of the main action, but stealing the spotlight with a single line or moment.
And in 1996, she got her big break when she was cast in the title role of Harriet the Spy, the first film produced by Nickelodeon Movies. As Harriet, Trachtenberg captured the restlessness of a curious, misunderstood child whose relentless need to observe the world cost her friendships and forced her to reckon with emotional consequences most 10-year-olds don't face. It was a nuanced performance for a 10-year-old actress, and critics praised her ability to carry a feature film with maturity well beyond her years. I wanted to pause on Harriet the Spy. Jason and I are a little old, to be honest with you, on Harriet the Spy, but my kids have seen Harriet the Spy. So you often will watch these movies at a different stage in your life. She's sensational. And I was a Nickelodeon kid growing up. There were Disney kids and there were Nickelodeon kids. That's how I always broke it down. A Disney kid was, those stories are.
Are you gonna categorize kids based on what they did?
I do a little bit. Nickelodeon was antic energy, and so it felt a little bit offbeat, and I related to it more than sort of Disney princesses and princes sort of winning people over in that way. She was a classic Nickelodeon kid, and she had this sort of open sincerity and relatability that I think was core to her sort of ability to translate messages in movies that I thought were very compelling.
I agree. And there was something I watched. I'd never seen this movie, but I watched clips of it for the pod. And it really was a situation where I think she played it more like a real kid and less like an kid
archetype
trying to perform as an adult. That point that we made earlier about how This was not for somebody who claimed sass is what you get from every young actor kid, right? Every young actor playing opposite adults, they give them sass and it's precocious. There was none of that with her. She was just a little kid who was kind of like loved being a spy and following people around and was mischievous, but was also
still a kid.
Still a kid.
Yeah, little awkwardness and confusion. As you said, I thought she pulled that off brilliantly. And by the early 2000s, she had joined the cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as Dawn Summers, the role that first made her familiar to mainstream audiences as a mysterious teenager who was later revealed to be a supernatural entity. And it was a risky move for the show, adding a new major character in its fifth season, but Trachtenberg quickly won over skeptical fans and critics with her performance and became a centerpiece of the show's final seasons. And
you know the show well, right?
I know this show very well. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a very important show. It launched Joss Whedon's career. It is obviously
Sarah Michelle Gellar's
huge
star, right?
Huge stars came from this show, and it was talky in a way that sort of seemed beyond their years, a little bit like Dawson's Creek, one of those shows where the characters were wiser, and she could pull that off. You know, she was just had the ability to sort of deliver her lines, and all the characters on the show, to be quite honest, but she could have disrupted the flow. The introduction of Dawn threatened to like undermine sort of the chemistry that the show had already built through its first 4 seasons. Instead, she seamlessly integrated, and the show went on.
Rocky. The fans hated her when she came in, but they were chanting her names on the way out. She really did an amazing job in that role, and I watched it. The show is what it is, not really my cup of tea, whatever, the supernatural kind of thing, but she was great. And the show was actually really well acted for what it was.
Yeah, and television is littered with adding a young character and it not working. Right? I mean, that's the story of television sitcoms. She actually is one of the rare success stories of being added late in the show.
This is blood, isn't it? It can't be me. I'm not a key. I'm not a thing.
Oh, sweetie, no. What is this all about?
What am I? Am I real? Am I anything?
By the mid-2000s, concerned about typecasting, Trachtenberg made a deliberate choice to distance herself from childhood roles and explore morally ambiguous personas. In 2004, she played Jenny in the raunchy teen drama Eurotrip, and then in 2005, she starred in Mysterious Skin, tackling themes of trauma and identity. I wanted to pause on Eurotrip. I love this movie. I think it's sensational, part of the National Lampoon's heritage. She played the classic sort of very attractive girl that is also friends with the 2 male characters who are kind of raunchy and only tell male jokes, and then they suddenly realize how beautiful she is. And she had that ability. You can't cast someone who is, drop dead gorgeous. You cast someone like Michelle Trachtenberg, who is beautiful, but sort of takes her hair down at some point in the movie. Here she flashed her breasts.
This was her bridge from playing the little girl in Harriet the Spy, a very young girl in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And she's next going to be Georgina, who is this very, she's only in her 20s, but playing a girl much older. And
she was shedding Harriet the Spy, very obviously.
This is what she is shedding, very obviously, right? It's a purposeful choice for her. She set out, I don't want to just be the young teen anymore. I want to be an adult actress. And this was that and also Mysterious Skin as well. Some adult themes in that movie as well. These were very purposeful choices of her to break free. And
she kind of pulled it off.
She did pull it off.
In both roles, she leaned into those darker and more complex characters, which, though she couldn't have known at the time, proved her to be the perfect actress to portray Georgina Sparks in Gossip Girl, the chaotic and cunning antagonist who stole nearly every scene she appeared in.
I mean, I was just trying to help your relationship along by getting you to finally kiss Blair. I couldn't handle the lack of action any longer, all those endless pauses and pained stares. So boring. She wants you to kiss her too. The fact that you haven't just done it already would be shocking if you weren't,
This role is one of my favorites, right? I love Gossip Girl. I'm not ashamed to admit it. She is one of the great villains in TV history. I don't think it's too far to go. The show, for all its detractors, was sensationally popular at the time, and her portrayal was fearless. It was like campy and manipulative, hilarious in parts. We would laugh out loud when she would come on screen. Every fan of the show, and I like I said, I'm a mega fan, loved Georgina Sparks. She was the hand grenade tossed into this idyllic world of the wealthy Upper East Side. Fans would cheer her as she would come on screen at watch parties and stuff. She is the #1 takeaway winner of that entire show.
And it's a tricky show to pull off. Think about all the diversity in her career. Harriet the Spy is a very sincere child movie. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a sort of talky teen drama.
It's sincere, though, in its own way.
Has its own sincerity. By the time you get to Gossip Girl, it is camp. It's not Dynasty, which we now look back at a show like Dynasty, which is a soap opera in prime time. It didn't know it was campy.
Right.
We now think it's campy. Gossip Girl knew what
Yes.
it was doing, so you had to cast actors who understood that tone very deeply. That, you had Blake Lively, Leighton Meester, and you had Michelle Trachtenberg, and they pulled it off brilliantly.
She also, no disrespect to the extent they care about my respect, she was a better actor than everybody else on stage, and she would come in and she would steal scenes from them left and right, and it wasn't even close. Like, she would be, God bless Leighton Meester, Georgina Sparks, Michelle Trachtenberg would come in and she would just out-act her in every scene. And it was what we loved about her. She was so much more authentic in the role in a way. It was just, loved the character, loved the actress. It was a perfect match.
Yeah. And although Trachtenberg had already established a successful career before joining Gossip Girl, her embodiment of the manipulative menace of Georgina Sparks became her defining role. In the moment, it was a towering achievement, and Trachtenberg became more famous than she had ever been. But it also inadvertently pigeonholed her with the audiences, making her synonymous with a single character, and Trachtenberg began to pay a price. She found it increasingly challenging to find more diverse roles. She began to suffer mentally and physically under the stress of a floundering career, which was only exacerbated by the then undiagnosed autoimmune condition that was sapping her strength. Trachtenberg was suddenly either unwilling or unable to take on the few roles that were offered to her. She fell into a malaise that seemed to consume her. Her former co-star in Harriet the Spy, Rosie O'Donnell, said she often reached out to the young actress during this time to try and offer some sort of assistance, but Trachtenberg resisted. O'Donnell said, quote, "I loved her very much. She struggled so much in the last few years. I wish I could have helped." And yet, through it all, Trachtenberg seems to have been able to retain a small circle of close friends and to continue to support various charities that focused on transitional housing and emotional support for teen girls in crisis, issues to which friends said were near and dear to her. In one of her rare interviews post-Gossip Girl, Trachtenberg said in 2016, quote, "I think people assume if you grew up on TV, you must have had it easy, but that's never the full picture. What you learn quickly is that you have to protect the part of yourself that's real, and that's not easy when everything around you is scripted."
My takeaway in reading a lot about Michelle Trachtenberg was this was a woman who suffered partially because of the physical ailments, largely because of the physical ailments, suffered greatly after Gossip Girl ended through tremendous mental illness. There were stories, we didn't go into them, of tremendous weight fluctuations, hundreds of pounds in each direction. And it really...
It's an impossible industry that's all built around image.
And she had nothing to fall back on. And she had these friends in the industry. Rosie O'Donnell and Sarah Michelle Gellar were friendly with her, but she retreated back to the people that she had known when she was growing up. And this was what she went back to as she was really suffering under some really debilitating mental health issues. It's a sad, at the end of the day, as much as we loved her and we talked glowingly about the roles and how much she meant to us as kids or whatever, it's ultimately a sad tale.
I think you're right. And what's interesting about Michelle Trachtenberg is she wasn't super public. She was a quite private person. So all that's left that we have in sort of a good way are these performances, which are sort of brilliant. You don't have to deal with, she wasn't smiling in public and hiding the tears all that much. She just wasn't in public as a sort of celebrity persona all that much. So we're left with Gossip Girl, we're left with Eurotrip, we're left with Harriet the Spy, and that's sort of lovely way because it sort of burnishes her legacy. If there's too much public persona like Lindsay Lohan, we think about a lot of the DUIs and things of that nature. With Michelle Trachtenberg, we just think about the performance.
And I think there was a risk, given the manner in which she died and the speculation and the uncertainty about it, that could have been the defining legacy. I mean, some people are known, Michael Jackson among them, as what do you think first about them? You think about the manner in which they died. But I don't think that's here. I think that, now that it's been sort of tidied up with a very common disease that we're all familiar with that, unfortunately takes a lot of people's lives, diabetes and its various complications, we can put that aside and really focus on what she brought, understanding, however, that she was a young woman who suffered from a lot of the Hollywood excesses of her early life and sort of unable to deal with the post-fame aspect of her life in a really meaningful way. Trachtenberg left behind a list of credits, but also a sense of unfinished business, both in the stories she could have told and in the people she might have reached. And while she might not have had a blockbuster phase or a string of awards season roles, her work mattered in a quiet, persistent way. She was the voice of a certain kind of girlhood, restless, introspective, sometimes angry, always curious. She gave us performances that felt human, lived in, and real. So it's fitting that the last word should go to the person who worked most closely with her on the role that arguably defined her generation, Buffy creator Joss Whedon. Speaking at her memorial, he said, "Michelle had the ability to make silence feel louder than dialogue. Her characters were full of questions, and so was she. She didn't act as much as she listened, really listened, and that's why she stuck with us. You don't forget someone who makes you feel seen, even if she's just playing pretend."